Meet the Press with Hugh Riminton.
Hello and welcome to Meet the Press. 2 weeks now to the carbon price. Our guest this week, as last week, was going to be Barnaby Joyce, but for the second week the Coalition has dragged him away. We're told this program is deemed too dangerous, and that is a quote. We blush in the face of such praise. But it is a shame because Senator Joyce deserves a considerable place in our political history. 3 years ago, when there was broad consensus between Kevin Rudd's government and Malcolm Turnbull's opposition on the need for an emissions trading scheme, Barnaby Joyce was then the prophet in the wilderness.
The ETS is just another mechanism, it's just a new tax. The Labor Party's great at these moralising new taxes.
It was Barnaby Joyce who coined the killer line, a great big new tax on everything, at a time when Tony Abbott was still happy to wave the legislation through.
Given the Rudd government's mandate, if you like, I think we are perfectly entitled to say, look, if this is what you want to do, do it.
Senator Joyce inspired the dissenters in the Coalition, and the dissenters ultimately toppled Malcolm Turnbull, with Tony Abbott the chief beneficiary and convert.
Barnaby is probably Australia's most accomplished retail politician.
He took on the Barnaby method based on catastrophic warnings of what carbon pricing will do.
That's the end of our beef industry, Michelle. It'll be the end of our sheep industry. I don't think your working mothers are going to be very happy when they're paying over $100 for a roast.
And so it began.
Whyalla will be wiped off the map by Julia Gillard's carbon tax.
Well, the tactic lives on. Tony Abbott on the carbon tax just this week.
It spells the annihilation of the domestic coal industry.
Well, with coal our biggest export commodity, Trade Minister Dr Craig Emerson knows a bit about it, and he is our guest today. And later, a titan of the resources sector, former BP President Jerry Houston, now a climate commissioner, joins us. But first, here's Raquel Eberly with what's making news this Sunday, June 17. Raquel, and now welcome back to the program, Craig Emerson. Good morning, Minister.
Good morning, Hugh.
Now,
good to be on a program that the Coalition considers to be too dangerous.
You're a brave man, I think, Dr Emerson. Let's start to go through some of this stuff that we're hearing, that we're continuing to hear in this last week. Tony Abbott there in Adelaide saying that domestic coal faces annihilation. He says that's not a scare campaign, it's a fact campaign. What's your response to it?
Oh, I think it's important not so much what they say, but what they do. And Coalition MPs have been buying up shares in the mining industry like they're going out of fashion. This is just part of the ongoing scare campaign. It was going to be a Cobra strike, and now it's a Python squeeze. Next thing you know, it'll be, your grandmother squeezing you on the wrist. I mean, Mr Abbott will have a lot of explaining to do after the 1st of July, because he will have to explain that when if he ever became Prime Minister, he yanks out the carbon price, that he would actually cut age pensions, increase taxes, take the tax-free threshold back from $18,200 to $6,000, put 800,000 people back into the tax system. These are the questions that Mr Abbott will have to answer after the 1st of July. I've been checking every second day, Hugh, just checking the sky. It seems to be at about the same height as it was, and I think that's going to be the case after the 1st of July. The chooks will get up, they'll lay eggs, kids will go to school, and people will get on with their lives, but the onus will be on Mr Abbott to explain why he's going to increase taxes and cut pensions.
OK, your point's well made there. I mean, one of the reasons that coal is unlikely to face annihilation and why there's so much investment in it is that we're exporting it in increasing amount. But isn't that, in fact, part of the problem, that there are other countries who are using our coal, burning our coal, putting those emissions into the air, and the reality is that the world hasn't got the message. It's still burning fossil fuels, no matter what we might do with the carbon tax.
We're making the transition to a low-carbon future. No one ever said that it would be a situation where on one day the use of fossil fuels would stop. What we want to do is, through carbon capture and storage research, see if there are ways of reducing the CO2 emissions of coal burning. But, of course, what we want to do is make a transition that is manageable in terms of people's living standards.
OK, well, carbon capture and storage, you mentioned carbon capture and storage. That's a dud, isn't it? There's hundreds of millions of dollars have gone into this thing. There's not a single sign that anything's actually coming out of it other than a few dinners in Paris.
the whole idea of research and development is to do the research and the development get the results. I saw Greg Hunt on another program this morning revealing that not a tonne of carbon has been saved from this research. Well, it's like any research and development project. You have to put your work in at the outset and see to get results the other end. That's the idea of research, it's the idea of investment. Not even Mr Hunt can get his mind around that.
So you still have faith in carbon capture and storage? You still have faith in it?
What I have faith in is to ensure that all of the possible research and development is done. This is not Australia going alone. We're doing it in collaboration with countries all around the world. And it's just, you know, yet again, people saying, oh, well, we shouldn't be doing that. Of course we should. We should look at ways of reducing emissions from fossil fuels. We've got large quantities of liquefied natural gas, which is regarded as a transition fuel to a low-carbon future, to a clean energy future. So Australia's well placed to contribute, but also through wind power, solar power, wave power, we're doing the lot because we are making a contribution. And as Climate Minister Greg Combet pointed out the other day, there's now 50 jurisdictions who are acting to put a price on carbon or in other ways to reduce carbon emissions. And we think that we can join a global effort to price carbon, to have a market-based mechanism, which is the most effective in the end.
So with carbon capture and storage, is it still a central plank, the effective development of this technology, to the whole government's plan for reducing carbon emissions?
We haven't factored in the results of research and development in our plans to 2020. What we've said is that we have a commitment to 2020 to reduce carbon emissions by 5%. That is supposed to be a bipartisan commitment. We are implementing that commitment through putting a price on carbon and associated measures. If carbon capture and storage produces results that are commercially viable to further reduce emissions beyond then that's a great thing. But there is supposed to be bipartisan commitment. All of these things do involve some cost, so don't believe the coalition where it says it can do this for virtually nothing. The cost of the coalition's direct action plan, if they did stick to that 5% target, would be $1,300 per household. Now, that's much greater than the more efficient process which we've embarked upon, which is putting a price on carbon and moving to a full carbon floating price mechanism and emissions trading scheme.
OK, Dr Emerson, we're going to take a break. We're going to come back with the panel. Big question, will the Prime Minister last to the next election? She reckons she's got a better chance than some of those people who are asking the question.
What about you and I set a commitment now to do Q&A during the 2013 election campaign? You can have that job and I'll have this job. They're not trying to get rid of you next year, are they? Sorry.
overseas fishermen going just right on the other side of the boundary.
Well, Raphael, that would be an argument never to have marine parks in your own waters, because commercial fishers could go beyond your own waters or could go beyond those boundaries. I think people are actually concerned with the ecological sustainability of our fish resources.
That's conceding that you're giving overseas fishermen access to the fish that you're denying Australian fishermen access to those fish.
I'm not conceding that at all. I'm simply saying that if the argument is that in some waters on the other side of Marine Park someone can do some fishing, if that's the argument, therefore that's an argument against having marine park boundaries, I think you'd be pretty isolated in that argument.
If we can ask about the ongoing saga that's involved Peter Slipper. Throughout the Thompson and the Slipper affairs, you have consistently, as a government, argued there has to be strict and staunch respect for due process. Yet when an argument is made against Mr Ashby, that's Peter Slipper's accuser, when an argument's made in court that's in the government's favour, out slips the first legal officer in the land, Nicola Roxon, and Anthony Albanese yesterday. All of a sudden you're willing to comment on a case while it's in court. What happened to respect for due process?
Well, the Commonwealth is a defendant in this case, and what the Attorney-General was articulating is the Commonwealth's defence against the allegations from Mr Ashby that the Commonwealth too is exposed to this sexual harassment case. And what Nicola Roxon set out was aspects of the Commonwealth's case which had been articulated in the courts. There's nothing wrong with that, but there is plenty wrong with the ongoing Liberal cover-up.
You've criticised the Coalition for making judgments about ongoing allegations.
We're not making...
That's exactly what Nicola Roxon and Anthony Albanese were doing.
That's not right. That is not right. Both of them were reporting on the case that the Commonwealth is mounting in defence of the allegations from Mr Ashby. What would be the situation where the Commonwealth simply said, we're not going to defend, we're guilty as charged, we're not going to do that. We're not going to do that. We are defending it, and we will defend it, because the Commonwealth believes that there are other motives here, that there are political motives, and that argument was put in the court on Friday. But of course, Mr Abbott and Mr Barnaby Joyce have gone to ground. Barnaby Joyce ducked out of this program to go for a soft interview because the Coalition didn't want him here. He actually described Mr Ashby as dodgy, but what we do know is that Joe Hockey was on the Sunshine Coast over Easter, said he had a one-on-one meeting with Clive Palmer. Clive Palmer outed him and said, no, at the Hyatt Coolum Resort there was another participant in the conversation, and that was Mal Brough. Now, why has Mr Hockey not want it known that he was on the Sunshine Coast before all this came up with Mal Brough? You've got Mr Abbott saying no one in the Coalition knew about this.
Well,
Mr Brough saying
was on Andrew Bolt's show saying Mal Brough says he's got nothing to hide. He's already asked his lawyers to contact the government lawyers.
Rubbish.
He wants his lawyers to expedite the process. He's willing to give the government whatever they like. He's got nothing to hide.
Nothing to hide. Listen, let's be clear about this. Mal Brough was asked about whether he had met Mr Ashby, and he said it's nonsense. He had plenty to hide. It's his statement. He said it's nonsense that he ever met Mr Ashby. Then he had to concede that he met him 3 times. Now it seems that there was even possibly more communication than that. So Mr Brough saying he's got nothing to hide, well, why did he seek to hide it? Why did he tell the media that it was nonsense, that the suggestion that he'd ever met with Mr Ashby? He met with him 3 times. He organised and worked on the preparation of the allegations against Mr Slipper, and he is a pre-selection candidate to try to defeat Mr Slipper at the next election. And then you've got Barnaby Joyce backing Peter Simpson, who's the National Party's favoured candidate. So it's one boiling mess up there. And then you've got Tony Abbott telling his MPs, his front benches, don't appear on dangerous programs like Meet the Press, because they might actually ask a question or two, which Mr Abbott runs away from. He was asked about a cover-up a few weeks ago. He cut off the press conference and ran away. He runs away in the Parliament. Everyone saw him running away in the Parliament. He runs away from hard questions, and now he keeps his front benches away from programs that might actually ask some tough questions, and puts him on to Bolt Report to have a cup of tea.
Well, we do appreciate you coming on this show to cop some questions. Anyway, Dr Everson, thank you very much. A big week coming up in Parliament, so thank you for your time today.
OK, thanks, Hugh.
Now, coming up, former head of BP, Jerry Houston. He's now a climate commissioner. We'll go to the break, though, with a bit of Bill Leak.
Thank goodness the punters have stopped listening to Gillard and Swan.
Let's hope they don't start listening to us.
Welcome back. This is Meet the Press. Now, for 34 years, Jerry Houston was an oil man, becoming the Australasian president of the global oil giant BP. He is now a climate commissioner and joins us. Welcome this morning.
Pleasure.
Now, you obviously still have very strong contacts in the resources sector. We've got the carbon tax coming in 2 weeks. What are your friends in the resources sector telling you about pricing carbon? Is it accepted that this is the way the world is going, or is there still resistance?
Well, you know, when I was directly involved, there was an emerging consensus, and you know, that came through both sides of Parliament, that the market should be the best way to actually find the lowest cost solution to this, and for a market to work, you need a price. And the convergence was around an emissions trading scheme. So that's what, you know, the emerging consensus around big business was.
Has that shifted at all? Is there a view now that a direct action plan alone could get you there?
I think there's a recognition that, you know, a lot of things can get you there. I think there's still the view that the market should do the job. But, you know, I think in terms of getting business people to step up now when there's a hot political debate going, I don't think anyone really wants to be piggy in the middle and at this time, yeah.
In terms of business certainty, all polls are pointing to the fact that Tony Abbott will be our next Prime Minister. He's vowed to scrap the carbon tax. What should business be betting on, that we will have a carbon tax or that it will be scrapped quite soon? Well,
I think you struck a very good issue there, Leah. You know, one of the things that we said, certainly when I was working with the Business Council and from BP's point of view, was we need a certain degree of policy certainty going forward on this, because otherwise the investment's not going to happen and the actions are not going to happen to reduce the emissions. And we have a large degree of political uncertainty now, which is not helpful. So until that uncertainty is resolved one way or another, I think the big step change investments that are required ultimately are probably not going to happen.
So what are you hearing? Do businesses think that this will go ahead, or will it be scrapped if Tony Abbott does win the next election?
Well, I think there's better people than me to comment on what's going to happen politically. But it is, I think people are just sitting back and saying, we'll wait and see what's going to happen. But the uncertainty doesn't help us make any definitive investments.
Do they think the egg can be unscrambled? Do people in business tell you that it's OK for them all to prepare for a carbon price, live with it for 12 months and then all of a sudden strip it out of their systems? Are they happy with something like that?
All I can say is, from my point of view, the amount of work that went into getting prepared for an emissions trading scheme in the first instance, nobody will want to unravel that willingly. But you've got the full spectrum of views out there in business. Some would like it to go tomorrow. Some would like to see their work rewarded and get a result. So I think a lot of people would say it's here, it's not perfect, but we actually want to continue with it and move on.
I want to ask you about the public argument, because around the country in the last week we've seen power price increases being approved by the regulators, an average of about 18%, about half of that due to the carbon tax. Here was a little bit of the reaction in the street.
Mm-hmm.
I might even have to sell my house. It's going up, it's ridiculous.
I thought, gee, well, I have to really turn off the electric blanket now and freeze in winter, so not impressed at all. They can put their carbon tax where the sun does not shine.
Now, if people are talking about having to sell their house, I'm not sure how serious she was, but if that's even remotely seriously being considered, the war's been lost, hasn't it, in terms of public support?
Well, I think this is an issue for the government to sell their policy, but I would venture to say in those particular cases they're going to be compensated for the increase in the electricity prices, because they seem to be in the range, as a result of the carbon price, seem to be in the range that Treasury was predicting. So I can't see that they're going to have to sell their houses or anything like that. In fact, I think I'll wake up on the 1st of July and don't think the world is going to have changed too much. But I think there is a lot of polarisation of the debate and a lot of scaremongering, and that's one of the reasons I became a commissioner in the first place, is that the debate seems to have been captured by the extremes. Those who believe there's a silver bullet and can solve it tomorrow, and those who say that nothing needs to be done because there's not a problem.
So you're the climate commissioner, you give us a few facts. In Germany recently, at the end of May, they got half of their power on their grid through renewables. It was on a Saturday they got a third of their power on a busy industry day through renewables. Yet when we look in Australia, you have an article in The Australian yesterday saying that a significant part of the reason for electricity bills is because we're paying too much for renewables. Government have to give people rebates and refunds. Is it too expensive to have renewables in our system, or is it actually entirely feasible and we can get to having half of them from renewables without any pain? Which of the two is true?
Well, I think they're both true, actually, to be honest. In Germany, it cost them a lot of money to get to where they got to. There's no doubt that that's been a high-cost route because it's tied up with energy security and a whole lot of other issues. Also, their grid is different. Ours is very much a centralised grid with a lot of infrastructure to move the electricity around, and that, of course, sets a sort of a barrier to entry for renewables. But there's no doubt that in many parts of the world, including ultimately in Australia, that renewables can be a very significant part of the mix. And when there's cheaper forms of storage of electricity, then it can become ultimately a big part of the prize.
I want to ask you about something slightly left field, but you were on the chairman's panel of the Great Barrier Reef Foundation and took an interest in the Great Barrier Reef. Are you satisfied, pleased, dismayed? Which one of these things, because of this announcement of the extension of marine reserves?
I think I think the Barrier Reef, from all that I learnt about it when I was on the panel, the Great Barrier Reef is a huge economic resource for Australia, and I think we need to make sure that we do take all necessary steps to protect it. But, and look at it through an economic prism. It is an economic resource. It creates a lot of jobs, a lot of tourism, and, we should play around with that at our peril.
And do you think that's also what motivates your interest in the climate aspects of it? Are you satisfied that the reef system is in danger because of climate change?
Oh, I think if it's a world problem, but if we don't do something to mitigate the emissions over time, then I think there's some very real risks for the Great Barrier Reef, and some of them are manifesting themselves today. Yeah.
OK, Jerry Houston, thanks very much for joining us today. And thanks also to our panel today, Leah and to Raf. Thank you both.
Thank you.
Now, a transcript and a replay of this program will be on our website, also on our Facebook page. You can go there and like us if you like. Until next week, when Paul Bongiorno is back in the chair. Goodbye.